I seriously stepped on a tack. God. This place is evil. What's up, ghouls? If you've been shopping around Halloween in the last couple of years, chances are you've probably seen the giant carnivorous plant that's been in Michael's. It's pretty cool. It's about 4 feet tall, and it looks pretty similar, a little bit skinnier than the typical Little Shop of Horrors Audrey 2 plant. Big, bulbous head full of teeth. Pretty awesome. I definitely saw it in the stores when it first came out. Got really excited, ran up to it, all ready to take it home, until I looked at the price tag. And I got way more spooked by that than the plant, because it was $200. And I don't know about inflation, but I'm guessing it hasn't gotten any cheaper. And I'm still not ready to drop $200 on a costume prop, even if I'm the kind of ghoul that would keep it around all year long. So I'm about ready to make my own, because I finally got at least the basic stuff I need to make one, and I've been collecting in the recent weeks all of the other things that I'm going to need to make one. So I've been watching a couple of tutorials that are already online on YouTube, but I'm not going to be making just a basic Audrey 2 plant, because that's already been done, and I don't know if it's hard to tell with me, but not only do I love spooky stuff, I also really love plant stuff. I just love plants in general. So I'm going to take on more of just a hint of realism in the plant that I'm going to be making. I'm going to make a multi-headed man-eating plant, which I feel is a teeny bit more realistic, because I don't know if you've seen a lot of plants that have one single stem on them, and that's the whole plant. So my plant's going to have multiple man-eating heads on it, and I'm going to do a little variation on the color scheme. I'm going to be looking at different realistic carnivorous plants like Venus flytraps and some pitcher pots, and I'm going to be painting them accordingly like that, which we'll see hopefully in the end product as I guide you along. And we'll make a little bit different of a man-eating plant than the ones that are already out there that are based solely on Audrey 2. I'm still gonna watch the movie though, because I mean, it's an excuse and I'm gonna do it. So we stalled long enough. Let's get started. So first up is spray painting, but you need safety gear when you do this. If you're doing it inside like me, hopefully you can do it outside in a well-ventilated area. But if you can't, let me tell you how I did it, because I did it in my spare room. And I got a mask from my hardware store. Harbor Freight had the cheapest mask. A really nice one, actually. I couldn't smell any of the fumes while I was working, so it was really nice. Kept me and my lungs safe. And I also just put on an apron to try to protect my clothes, and wore clothes I didn't care about, so it didn't matter if I got paint on them. And I also put up a barrier to protect my wall and my table I was working with, so any of the paint that made it past didn't get on anything, didn't ruin anything. So I put a box fan in the window, the open window, and had it pulling the air outside. And after I was done with my painting, I kept all the stuff in there, and I closed off the room, and I sealed the room, making sure no air could get out. It was just being pulled outside, and so I kept the fan on overnight. and maybe a little longer, and it eventually cleared all the fumes from the room, so it actually worked pretty well. I did this a couple of times with all my spray painting for this project. So I sprayed it with a glossy black spray paint, and I made sure to turn it all around, every different angle, to get all the cracks and crevices, and make sure I didn't miss any spots with the paint. It's got a lot of different lumps and bumps, so I had to get all of those, but it came out pretty good. I did get a couple of spots on my fingers because I didn't wear gloves, but you know, I'll live. So our next step is carving mouths into our carvable pumpkins that will be the head of our plant. And there's many tools you could use: kitchen knives, carving pumpkin knives, Exacto knives. I unfortunately chose a really cheap dollar store one. You'll see why that doesn't work out for me in a second. But there's the basic shape that I chose for the mouth. It worked pretty well, so if you want to copy that, you can. But dollar store Exacto blade didn't work because it just couldn't tighten in there enough, and it kept slipping out of the holder, so I couldn't use that, unfortunately. So the next tool that I used, probably not a lot of people have. It's basically a hot knife. It's kind of a wood burning tool / soldering iron tool. Kind of a multi-purpose tool. It basically has a lot of attachments that come with it. I put in the hot knife for what I'm doing. It's kind of like the Exacto knife, except you plug it in and the end heats up. It gets very, very hot and is basically supposed to cut through things like these styrofoam pumpkins like butter. It worked pretty good in the beginning. When I started using it, it certainly was easier to use than an Exacto knife or a regular knife, trying to saw back and forth through the relatively hard foam. I did, however, have to put a lot of pressure on the knife, and unfortunately, I had kind of the same end results that you'll see here at the end with the knife. I had an unfortunate incident with it. I didn't hurt myself, but I did hurt the knife. So I wouldn't be able to say that I recommend using this tool, because I did end up breaking it. So it was pretty easy to use while I was using it, which is really unfortunate because I was almost all the way done. I was on the very last pumpkin when it did break. But I was kind of having the same problems I had with the Exacto knife, where the blade part of the tool seemed to be kind of coming loose. I guess all that pressure from pushing down on the pumpkins there was getting to it, which I don't understand why it would be, because if a hot knife tool isn't for going through like little styrofoam like this, I don't know what you could use a hot knife tool to cut. So I was very frustrated with that. So you could probably see me wiggling the pieces a lot.
at the end. I did sometimes have to cut a second or third time to cut them and get them all the way out. But it wasn't too hard to finally wiggle them all out. I didn't break them off or anything, so it was okay. However, here is the part where all the pressure did build up in the knife, and maybe a combination of that and the heat, and you can see the broken off part. Now, it actually broke off inside the tool, so unfortunately it wrecked the whole tool and the tool set. I had to throw it away. But luckily I had a wrench in the room, so I quickly just grabbed my wrench because the part's still hot, and pulled it out of the pumpkin, put it somewhere safe. Then I finished the last pumpkin off camera with a better Exacto knife I bought from my hardware store. Okay, so now we're going to paint the stems, and I just chose some wooden dowels from the hardware store for the stems, as well as actually a broom handle from the dollar store for the shortest one. And I just had them cut to different heights so that they would all be staggered and the plants would look a little bit more natural. And now I'm just painting them in some dark green spray paint. I'm not painting all the way to the bottom, so one, I can hold them and not get paint all over my ungloved hands again, and two, because you won't see it when it goes down in the pot. So the next step is cutting a hole inside your pumpkin heads to fit their stems on. And so how I did this is I just traced with a green pen around the bottom of the pumpkins, measuring on top of each of their stems to see how big the hole would need to be. And you don't want to make the hole too much bigger because you want it to be pretty flush with the stem that you're putting inside, otherwise it'll rattle around. And I just got my Exacto knife, a pretty good size to cut a small hole like that, and it was nice and sharp. I'm just making cuts as I need to. It was a little too small, so now I'm just whittling out little bits at a time to make sure it will fit around the stem. You can always cut more away, but you can't put more back on. So just keep that in mind when you're making cuts. And here you can see just what they look like on their stems real quick in the pot. Now I'm filling my pot. I've got a couple inches of some just sandy gravel and larger rocks. I've got wrapping paper rolls in there to hold my dowels and my stems in place. And now I'm just filling it with Great Stuff Big Gap Filler. It comes in the black can. And I'm doing this because my pot is actually styrofoam, so filling it with concrete could potentially break it and be too heavy. The gravel and the foam should be a good combination of weighing it down and filling it up, because it is a big giant pot. So, and I did put some gravel in there too, and I did end up having to use 2 cans of the foam, so I did 2 layers of this. So now I'm taking more Great Stuff foam, this time gaps and cracks filler, and I'm going inside each of the pumpkin heads, and I'm just spraying some to cover the dowels, and I'm trying to give some texture inside the mouth, make it look a little bit more alien, make it maybe look a little bit gummy. This didn't work very well inside the small mouths, but when I was doing the small mouths, I also didn't know that if you want to do this, you should also, halfway through the curing process, have gloves on and press down on the foam to stop the curing process. Otherwise, the foam blows up too big and just takes over the whole mouth. So that's what happened to my 2 smaller pumpkin heads. The foam just completely expanded way too much, and I ended up having to carve out a bunch of it, and it didn't look as good as I wanted it to. But it turned out really good on my larger pumpkin heads. There was way more room to work with, and it ended up having this pretty cool gum texture. So I would just advise you to press down on the foam as it's drying after it's just not sticking to your hands really anymore, because the air is expanding and you want to stop it from expanding, so that's why you push it down. Okay, so now that the foam inside the mouths are dry, we're going to paint them, and I've got this deep purple color called Glossy Icy Grape that I think will look really nice inside. And since I made those cardboard holders inside the pot, I can still remove my stems, and so I can turn them all around like this to get the top and the bottom of the inside of the mouth and get it all nice and covered really well. You don't want any of the foam showing through. You want it just all that nice purple color. And I've also taken some painter's tape and covered over the lips just as an extra precaution. I don't want a lot of deep purple on the outside of the mouth. It's just gonna kind of discolor it when I put a final coat of green on the outside. Might give it just a weird splotchy color, even though the lips will probably cover most of it. I just wanted to take an extra precaution because I didn't want to do a lot of coats of paint on the outside of the mouth. I'll just remove the tape after I'm finished and the paint's all dry. Okay, so the next step is forming the lips, and I did this with some air dry clay that I found at Michael's. It was just their kind of store brand one, the cheapest one that there was in there. I managed to find some that were on sale, so it was about $2 a package. Other than that, I think they were like $4 a package normally, but it wasn't too bad a foam. It was really pretty light and squishy when it dried. It was a little frustrating to work with. It was really nice and soft and almost wet when you took it out of the package. And it rolled out and molded pretty well. But after you worked with it just for a little bit, it started to kind of dry and it didn't really want to form into itself very well. So smoothing it over itself, forming the lips together, was kind of difficult. This was a pretty aggravating step for me. But pretty much you just roll it out, form it to the shape of the lips, and then just kind of I mostly did it on the outer corners. I probably should have done it more on the inside of the gums, but I just kind of pressed it down and made kind of a seamless seal as best I could. If I had had more foam, I barely had enough to finish. If I had had more packages, I probably would have put more foam down inside the mouth and around the gums. But I wanted to make a little go a long way because I didn't want to spend a lot of more money on this project. So, I mean, it still worked. It just, for the bigger pumpkins, I used a lot of the foam to make bigger lips, and they kind of started to sag during the drying process. I came and checked on them a couple of times while they were drying kind of overnight, and they were kind of sagging. I had to kind of push them back up and reform them. I guess due to gravity, I took them off their stands and kind of laid them down, and it helped them to just lay on their backs and have them just sit on it that way. That way gravity wasn't tugging on them, making the foam kind of want to fall down and fall off. But I also used a couple of different colors of the clay just because they didn't have all white at the store. They had like 1 or 2 packages of white, and I used the yellow color for the rest of it. I actually ended up liking the yellow color better. It made really kind of a nice undercolor for the lips with that I painted red. So I'd even just use yellow if I did it again. I wouldn't even go with the white. The yellow was a really nice undercolor. So running out of the white worked out. I did have to, again, form the lips a couple of times because it just wasn't smoothing and working out for me. Pretty much, this foam isn't good for blending. I just had to make a coil snake once and put it over the mouth and blend it and try not to smush it. I did smush the lips a few times. Working with them, it was really hard to fix. I had to take just the whole lips off the mouths a couple of times and just redo them. There's really not any blending with this air dry foam clay. So it's pretty much just roll it out and do it, and whatever you get done in one shot is what you get. So also, you will want to make lip lines when you are forming the lips. Any kind of tool like a toothpick, or if you have clay tools, that will work. Just make vertical lines up and down like you'll see on your own lips. It really adds a lot of texture and it adds a lot of depth, especially when you will paint the lips later. It looks much better. I forgot because I got so aggravated, so I did mine when they were already mostly dry. I had a rotary knife tool, so luckily for me that worked pretty well, and I just ran that up and down the lips, and it made lots of nice little vertical cuts that still look like lip lines, so I was still able to put those in. Okay, so now we are painting the outside of the plant heads, and I chose a dark green and a light green color. I started out the first pumpkin with the dark green first, but I switched that up because I thought it was way nicer to start with the light green first and spray the darker on top of it after I did the first one. But basically, doing the light green around the lips and everything. I also did the smallest head, mostly light green, because I thought it wouldn't be so dark, because it's not fully grown yet, it's just a baby. So I did I did color him a little bit differently than the other ones. But after that, I spray painted the backs of it dark green on the very backs, and I kind of spray painted out some nice stripy lines flowing with the lines of the pumpkin towards the mouth. And the paint did this really awesome thing where it just kind of flowed on top of the different layers and speckled in itself. So I've got all these really cool kind of light green speckles showing up through some of the dark green paint. It just adds a really nice planty effect and makes them look very cool. And the only downside was spraying so much spray paint on the pumpkins. This is the only point where spray painting actually started to drip, especially on the bigger pumpkins. I had to get a lot of paint on there. I had to move them around a lot and spray around a lot. My biggest pumpkin was very drippy. I actually had to lay it on the table and let it drip onto there. I've got a lot of drippy paint on the cover on the table, so if you do this, be aware, it's going to drip. Okay, so now we're gonna paint the lips, and I chose a few different shades of red as well as some purple just for around the gum line, and I lined them up the same way they are going to be on my palette. If you care and want to get the same shade of red, just in case, that's the way I had it and that's the way I used it. So I just started with the first red there. It was kind of the medium but brightest shade of red. It's the one I used the most. I liked it the most. It was really just the best red that there was, and it was really good just to get a baseline and paint the whole lip with it. It took the most time. You can see some of the lines on the lips probably just through the paint that I did there with the knife. And I just made sure to get the entire lip up around on the seam and also down and get all the yellow of the foam inside the mouth. This did take a little bit of time, but it was worth it, I think, to layer with all the colors. I also did the darker reds on the outsides of the lips, around the seams, and on the inside to give it some depth. I also put the dark purple in some of the tears and the deep cracks in the lips to make it look like, well, they were cracked. And it turned out really nice. And then I also went in with the bright red and put in some highlights on the fullest part of the lips. And I just thought it made it look really nice and gave it some depth that just painting it flat red didn't do. Alright, so the next step is I'm painting a pattern on the top of the plants. Since I'm modeling them over some pitcher pots, which are real-life carnivorous plants, the ones that I looked up have this really cool black kind of spider web or veiny, almost like tree branch pattern on them. They look really cool. They're these green plants that have this really pretty bright or dark red pattern on them, and I thought it would just be a really cool touch for my plants to have that pattern on them as well. I thought it would tie in with them being a little bit more realistic carnivorous plants. Plus I love pitcher pots. So basically I'm just doing the pattern on the little one right here. Just some bigger, fatter stripes, just vertically coming from the back of the pumpkin head, going to the front of the lips, and it was a little bit tedious. It took some time. I did get a little frustrated because it is so many lines, and in between The thick lines is even thinner lines, which then you spider vein every which way, and it's just very intricate and detailed, and it's frustrating to do, but once you're done, it looks very cool. Okay, so next step is making our teeth, and I decided to make mine out of polymer clay. It was just something that I had on hand, so I didn't have to spend any more money. There is pumpkin teeth that you can buy from like Etsy, but it was kind of pricey with the shipping and everything on top of it, so I decided not to buy those. I did try to model my polymer clay teeth after the pumpkin teeth that I saw, so if you see the weird little knobs on the end of the teeth, I was hoping that the polymer clay would bake hard enough to where it would be like the pumpkin teeth and they would be like little toothpicks that I could just jab into the pumpkin. This didn't really work out. It worked for like maybe one or two of them, which got hard enough to jab into the really foamy parts of the lips, but not so much for the rest of it. So I'd probably advise just making flat teeth and just gluing them to the mouth. It would probably be much easier than what I did. I made different sized teeth. Bigger ones go in the front where there's more room, and then you'll need smaller ones if you want to put some on the side. Now I'm painting tartar on the teeth, basically mixing yellow and browns to make a tartar color. Then I'm painting on most of the tooth. I'm leaving the tip white, and I'm painting a darker brown around the gum line and just wiping it off a little bit, just to make them look a little more realistic when they go in the mouth. Next is making the tongues, and I tried a couple of different ways. I tried the first way with wire and tinfoil, and then air dry clay on top. Really, you just need maybe the tinfoil inside. It just helps you not use so much air dry clay. The air dry clay also takes a really long time to dry, so I made one by itself, but the rest of them I just stuck directly onto the mouths, basically formed inside the pumpkins. So you can do it that way, just kind of form the clay down onto the bottom of the mouth. And then I went ahead and painted them. I painted them black to resemble this different kind of plant, the vampire lily or the voodoo lily. Basically one with a big black stem in the middle of it, and apparently very, very stinky. But I just thought it was nice to model another thing after another kind of plant, not carnivorous, but still kind of creepy and cool. And I thought the black tongues looked really awesome when they were done too. So now I'm putting in the teeth, and what I'm doing here is basically I'm trying to make a hole to put the little pumpkin tooth insert that I made inside. So basically for each one I'm digging in a little hole, then jabbing it in there and gluing it in with some super glue. And here's the clip where my cat decided to knock over my camera by rubbing on my camera stand. Whoops, there we go. I did wear disposable gloves for this. I didn't want to get super glue on my hands. It really sucks. So do wear protection. I got the teeth stuck to the gloves multiple times, so you do need it here. So for the last big head, I didn't put the teeth actually inside the gums anymore. They were just way too big and the pumpkin was just too tough. So I basically just stuck them up around the gum rim and glued the sides down. So they were kind of back behind the gums and sticking up and out. So this part went much faster and was much easier. Basically, I just had to super glue them. Just had to have as much point of contact as I could and just glue them in there on the inside of the pumpkin, on the gum lines. There was only one that really gave me trouble, but it was much easier than doing the way I had been. Okay, so the next step is to make the mouth look wet. Basically, maybe dripping with something like saliva or more likely nectar to lure something in to eat. I used this triple thick glaze that I found from Michael's. It worked really well. Basically, you just paint it on with a paintbrush. What it does is it makes matte things look nice and glossy and glazed when it dries. It was a little bit stinky. I did put on my spray painting ventilator mask after I did the first pumpkin head and I kept it on. The smell was a little unpleasant, but other than that, it worked out pretty well. I only had to put one layer on. It said you could put up to a few layers on, but one layer was enough for me. It gave it that nice, wet, glossy look. I put it on the lips and the teeth and a little bit of the gums. Just painted it on I did paint it on pretty thickly for one layer. Let it kind of drip down the teeth, but it stayed in the mouth. Okay, so this is your first good look of what the finished layer of the pot looks like. Basically the top layer, I have a little bit of gravel layered on the top of it and some of the foam bubbled up and it kind of looks like rocks. So I'm just painting that now so that it no longer looks like spray foam. I started off with brown, pretty quickly found out that that looks like doo-doo. And so I quickly switched to black, which I liked much better anyway. It matches the rest of the pot, and it just looks like nice black rocks in there now. And I did paint some of the stems that were left unpainted and just the cardboard holders in there, dark brown to kind of match the darkened colors of the stems. But other than that, I painted the rest black, just really got in there with my paintbrush, and it just looked like really nice, dark, rich gravel when I was done. Okay, last step is putting the foliage on the plant. So I've got a hot glue gun. I've also got a little plate to rest my hot glue gun on so I don't get anything anywhere. And I'm just going to start with the smallest head, and I've got some small leafed ivy vines that I'm going to put on it. And I'm just taking one end of the ivy, taking a small bit of hot glue and putting it on the ivy, and then I'm just sticking it to kind of the center point of the back of its head, like where a vine might grow into the back of it. And I'm just sticking it on with the hot glue, being very careful not to burn myself. I wish I had some hot glue gloves, but unfortunately I don't. And after I glue it on, then I'm just wrapping the ivy all the way around the stem of the plant to cover it, get it nice and covered in some foliage. And with the leftover on the bottom, you can't really see, but I'm just letting some of it drape off the side of the pot, so you got a little bit of ivy hanging down the pot. It looks pretty nice. For the second stem, I'm doing the same thing. I'm gluing the ivy on the back of the head first, letting it cool off a little before I stick it on there so I don't burn my fingers, and then just wrapping it around the stem again and adding more and more ivy as I go along. You can get whatever really fake foliage greenery you can get your hands on, and whatever your preference is. I got a lot of ivy different places. I bought it online, I got some at the dollar store, and I got my most expensive one at Michael's. I used that for the two bigger heads. So I got one strand of vines foliage from Michael's. It was pretty expensive, so I wasn't gonna get another one. I measured one slightly shorter half against the slightly shorter stem and cut it with wire cutters. And then because the thread around it was fraying where I cut, I just glued it with hot glue real quick so that it wouldn't keep fraying. And then I wrapped it around the top of the stem and just wrapped the rest of it all the way around all the rest of the stem and glued the top to the top really well. The bottom, unfortunately, was not gluing. For some reason, the wire was just really inflexible and really stiff. So I had to take some 20 gauge wire that I already had and just make a loop and wire it shut, and it held really well. It didn't hold with the hot glue, but it did hold with the wire and the hot glue, so that worked. And then I just took one strand of the vines that was sticking out in the back from the strand from Michael's, and then glued that to the back of the pumpkin head. And it looked really nice when I was done. I did use other types of foliage on this one as well. I used more of my other kinds of ivy. I used my ivy that I found at the dollar store. It worked really well. It was pretty nice and really nice and cheap. I don't think you have to use the really expensive stuff from Michael's, but it did make it look pretty nice, and I did get a lot of it, but I still don't think it was worth the price. It was really expensive. It was like $20, and that was on sale. So for the tallest one, I took a thicker vine that I got, and I took the one I got from Michael's, and I just kind of twisted them around together. And then I took the wire I took from before and secured it on the top and the bottom of the stem, because again, it just wasn't holding with hot glue. There was too much tension in it, so I really needed the wire to secure it down. I just hit it with more foliage, more ivy, and you really can't see it once everything's on there. I used some pretty small wire as well, so it wasn't a big problem. And I just kept on adding more foliage, and it looked pretty good. So lastly, I'm just putting some leaves on the back of the heads, and I'm just putting them kind of alongside where I glued the stems. I'm taking the stems I have from the leaves and basically kind of bending them so they'll be on line to be glued on the back of the head pretty securely, and then I'm just snipping them off any excess because they came in just one big bundle, and then I'm just gluing them with hot glue on the back of the heads, and they're looking pretty good. And I also have just some plain silk ones that I bought online. They're a little bit in color, but they're the same shape, so I think they look pretty good. And those I'm just clipping pretty short, and I'm just gluing on the leaf onto the back of the pumpkin head, since the stems are basically nothing there. There's just wire. It's not enough to glue on. And here you can probably see that I've pushed down some fake ferns into the foam in the pot, and I've let some of the ivy drip down the sides for some extra foliage. And here's an up-close look of the back of the completed plant heads. You can see where I glued on the vines, and you can see where I glued on the leaves. All in all, it's not super pretty job, but it looks pretty good for something that you're not really ever going to see. You should be looking at the front of the heads, I would hope.
On a cold night. On a cold night. Tonight. On a cold night. On a cold night. Tonight.
We're at the end. We've completed the plant, finally. It's been a really long process. I started just the crafting portion of this in October, way back in spooky season, when this project maybe made a little bit more sense to some people. But you know what? Now it's February. And, you know what? Man-eating plants, you know, maybe some of us could use some of those right about now. You know, it's that time of year. Now, so, but you know what? Maybe you got that kind of loved one where, you know, some of us would love some carnivorous plants for Valentine's Day. So, let's bring it back around. In the end, I did not keep track of how much, all in all, I spent on this project. Mostly because I gathered materials over such a long period of time that, and I just don't keep track. I'm not a good record keeper. I remember what I spent on it today. In the end, I did spend more than I wanted or planned to. But I did make a very big project. It is a 4-headed giant carnivorous plant. I would anticipate this would be sold for much more even than the one in the stores, at least 2 or 3 times more, so maybe take that into account. Did I end up spending as much as the original one that I saw for Michael's? Maybe. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to know. I did not keep good enough track. However, I was, in the most part, a fairly smart shopper. I bought just about everything I could buy on sale. I bought what I could for at the best, cheapest price. And I bought a lot of stuff online, which is much cheaper. You know what? For the time I put into it, I'm happy. I'm pretty happy with how it is and how it turned out. and I could have made a few things better if I had put in much more effort, but I just don't want to put in all that extra effort. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with it, and that's just about it. I am sorry if you had to suffer through what probably wasn't the best footage. All I have is this little room to do my stuff in, and I've got this computer table, and I've got my craft table behind me in this little spare bedroom, and then the big plant in here too didn't really create even space to walk around in, let alone wedge a camera in and get some good shots. And it's just me, so I didn't have a cameraman, and I don't have very good camera stands yet because I'm very poor. So sorry about the camera footage. I'll try to explain, or hopefully I did explain the best that I could around the shots that you got, and you can kind of understand what I did and how I did it and how this beauty was made. And hopefully you had a pretty good time watching me make this beautiful monstrosity. I don't know what to call her yet. Them? They? You know, there's a lot of heads, so I'm not quite sure what to name them. The name I got right now in my head is maybe Mavis. I kind of like that name. It sounds kind of like a plant name. But you think you got a better name? You think you know what they should be called? Maybe multiple names, multiple heads. Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to know what you think about this thing I've created that took me so long. And let me know if you end up making any of your own. I'd love to see it. Let me know. And please like and subscribe. Thank you. Bye.